everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the conversation with Al McFarlane. I am Dr. Irma McClaurin. I am the Culture and Education Editor at Insight News, and I'll be sitting in for Al McFarlane today, along with my fellow contributor, Yoji Senna, who will be joining us shortly from Brazil live. And I have a brief announcement to make, which is that the Department of Health from the Minnesota Department of Health is hosting a COVID vaccine event. And that's going to be held at the Amherst H. Wilder Center Saturday, July 15th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. That address is 451 Lexington Parkway North in St. Paul, Minnesota, 55104. Health is Wealth. Come out and join us. Join them for that event. So today I'm very excited. We have a wonderful show, but I want to start with welcoming all of you to the conversation with Al McFarlane. Please, whatever you're watching, please go to our YouTube channel and subscribe. We look forward to having you join the others who have become regular subscribers to this. And thank you for tuning in. So I want to begin with an interesting event that someone sent to me, a powerful thing that happened after a child's gravestone was burned. This was an event that was listed in the Washington Post. And the reason it's significant is that the grave that was vandalized was actually a historic grave in a Black cemetery. And this grave has been there since the 1850s. And apparently people have been leaving objects, toys, and things to sort of honor this person who would have been an enslaved child and who died early in her life. And I think what it speaks to is that people began to understand the importance of Black cemeteries and what it means to respect the dead. And I think we have to sort of keep that in mind, that as we are in this current climate of erasure and people wanting to rewrite history, that Black cemeteries are important symbols of what life was like and sort of how people honored the dead and how they remembered them. So, you know, keep that in mind as you go past historic cemeteries to do so with respect. And let me introduce you today. I am pleased to bring with you two people who I know well. Maya Spikes, who is a writer and a writing coach, and also the president of the Triangle Association of Freelancers, of which I'm a member because I spend part of my time in Raleigh, North Carolina, and the other part in Mobile, Alabama now. And Zaylore Stout, who is a renowned attorney. He is based in both Minnesota and California. He's a community organizer and has become an author over the last few years. And so I'm bringing them in to talk about our topic today, which is, why can't Black writers get any respect? And I want to do that by starting with an homage to someone who I found to be sort of an extraordinary writer. On July 6th of this year, it marked the 18th anniversary of the passing of James Haskins. Now, why is that important? Because James Haskins was considered the unofficial biographer of Black America. He was my colleague at the University of Florida. He was in the English department. He was one of the founders of the children's literature department. But James Haskins is important because he wrote over 150 books. In fact, I had the stats here, which is that he actually wrote single-authored at least 140 books of his own. And then he co-authored a number of books. And then he also edited book series. And the irony is, nobody knows who he is. Nobody honored him. There haven't been any big celebrations about him. And it forced me to beg the question, what is happening? And why can't Black writers get any respect? And so one of the things that Jim brought to mind when I think about him, and he passed away about 18 years ago, so we've had a long period of time, he was one of the foremost writers of Black biographies. And I'm writing an article about him in which I say he is both the humanitarian philosopher, that's how he liked to describe himself. He is the unofficial biographer of Black America because most of what he wrote were biographies, and you probably know some of them. He wrote about Rosa Parks, um, the book Bojangles, which was made into a movie by Richard Gere. He wrote about Black culture in America, Black dance, Black music. He wrote about Stevie Wonder, Diana Ross, Rosa Parks, and I could go on and on and on naming the number of people that he wrote about. And yet we don't know who he is. And so I want to bring my guest on, both Maya and Zaylore, to talk about what does it mean to be a Black writer? And given the current climate that we're in today, what are some of the challenges that Black writers face? So good to see you, Maya and Zaylore. Happy that you could join me. And so this is the question I want to pose to you. And I'll start with you, Maya. You're the president of an association of freelance writers. And so can you speak a bit about the fact that someone like James Haskins, and raise your hand if you knew who he was. I mean, that's the irony. This man has written over 164 books, and most people don't even know who he is. But how is it possible? What are some of the challenges you yourself have faced as a Black writer today? Maya, if you could speak to that and speak about the fact that you're a writing coach, and sort of how do you tell people to keep going when we have someone who was so prolific and nobody knows his name?
Those are very good questions. And yes, there are definitely a lot of challenges that writers face. And I feel like one of the challenges, especially in when a writer is trying to promote their work or promote their book, especially if they're trying to get out in front of traditional media, TV shows, and even newer media like podcasts, is that the people who book authors, for television or for podcasts, sometimes it's not overt racism. Sometimes it's just an unconscious bias. You book who you know, and if you're booking people that you know, or someone who knows somebody who knows somebody,
Yes,
those people are going to tend to look like you, or have a similar lifestyle, or just going to be people that you have things in common with. So that's why it's so important to have diversity, not only among authors, to have a diverse range of voices, sharing their work and sharing their writing. But that's why diversity is also important behind the camera, for television shows, because it's the people,
and also
yeah,
publishers. Yes,
and also publishers as well.
I'm going to
So
switch to
that's one particular challenge.
I'm going to switch to Zaylore, because Zaylore is kind of a phenomenon. He is an attorney by training, and now he's getting more visibility as a self-published author. So Zaylore, how'd you do it? Given what Maya has said in terms of it being difficult to be booked and some of the challenges that people may harbor, because we know the publishing industry is predominantly white still.
It is.
We know that media, mass media, mainstream media is predominantly white still. And so tell us how you managed to, one, publish a book, have it be so successful that you're now probably spending more time as an author than you are as a lawyer. So tell us about it.
Well, it's actually a funny question, because I'm here in Orlando at a conference, and somebody asked me, like, are you still lawyering? And I'm like, yes, I'm still a lawyer. That's my day job. So I actually got pretty lucky. I had a dear friend, Dara Beavis, who's with Wise Inc. Creative Publishing. She's a Black woman. And so, when I had my book idea, I was able to meet with her. And it's really the independent publishing companies out there that are the ones that are really, hitting the pavement in regards to ensuring that, you know, traditional folks that aren't traditionally in the author circle or in the author field have access to being able to publish a book. And so I shared my idea in regards to a book with her, and she said, "You absolutely, this book absolutely has to be written, and you have to write that book." And so, you know, so my first book was Our Gay History in 50 States, that highlights significant people, places, and queer facts on a state by state basis. And I think the important part about having you know, diverse authors is sharing that different perspective, because many of the, let's say, LGBT history books that are out there are written from a cisgender, you know, white male perspective. And so, you know, to have somebody that comes to it with a lens of it, diversity and inclusion, and folks that are normally not represented in regards to those stories is an essential component of that. So I think I'm pretty lucky that I had somebody in the industry that I could have, you know, an honest conversation with in regard to this book idea. But I know that that's not the norm for most people. Most people don't know folks that are in the industry. And so if you're going one of the more traditional publishing routes, there can be challenges in regard to that, especially if the decision makers are the ones that don't necessarily find value in regards to the story that you're trying to share. And if they're from if they're not from your background or from your culture, sometimes it's hard for them to see that there's a market for it.
Right. And I'm going to bring on Yoji Senna, who is my co host. He's broadcasting live from Brazil. Yoji, good to see you here. Um,
You.
and what I'm going to do is ask you a little bit about what's happening in Brazil. But first, I want to at least tackle what Zaylor talked about. Both you and Maya have mentioned what I wrote an article about in Insight News some years ago, and I call it the Rolodex of inequality. Now we have the contacts on our phones, but it's still like whoever's in your phone book is who people tend to call and connect to. And as you've mentioned, Zaylor, if you don't have those connections, then it's very difficult. There are organizations for women in media. There are Black Writers Conferences. But, you know, if you want to make a living uh, being a writer, it's a challenge. And Maya, could you say something about that as the president of an association for freelancers? How challenging is it for someone to make a living as a freelance writer?
There are a lot of challenges for writers, I would say, from all backgrounds, because first there's just the overwhelm of information. If you ask two different writers, you know, how to make money writing, you're probably going to get a minimum of three different answers. You know, so there's first, a lot of writers get overwhelmed with all the information's out there and not knowing where to start. And then on top of that, writers, you know, we tend to be isolated, especially if we have a day job and, you know, have to take care of our family responsibilities. You know, that leaves a limited amount of time to hang out with your friends, further less go out and look for writing groups or look for other writers in your community. The good thing is that social media is helping a little bit with that and helping writers connect online through social media groups. But still, it's a challenge. And then on top of that, all of that, even when you do start, you know, connecting with potential clients, then there comes the issue of pay. And some clients don't want to pay writers, just point blank, of no matter what background they're from. And then when you add top of that, our industry is just like, you know, all the other industries. Women in general tend to get paid only a
Yes.
fraction of what men make in the industry. And then once you start adding, you know, people of color, people from the LGBTQ plus community, you know, that fraction just gets smaller and smaller. So those are just some of the challenges that that writers face.
I'm going to bring Yoji in, and you know, I'd ask you if you could say something about what is happening with Black writers in Brazil? I know there must be Black writers, but how do they get known? Are there outlets for them in terms of publishing?
Greetings, everyone. Thank you for having me here again. Well, it is a little uh, as complex as it is in the US, and probably even more. But we have some curiosities here in Brazil. So the biggest writer of the Brazilian literature from the 19th century, that kind of is the guy who almost set up the standard of Brazilian intellectuality. It's a writer called Machado de Assis that, in certain way, up to recently, people have kind of hiding that he is black, and even though that his narrative, or in his book, it was not because of the era a militant instance of black activism. He was a very subtle critic and reporter of the reality of black Brazilians in the 19th century. So going forward to the 21st century, presently, I don't have his name up in his mind right now. I'm having difficulty reminding. But the bestseller right now in Brazil, it is a black author. He is writing about exactly the relationship between land and race in the area here around Salvador, and he has sold more than 1 million books recently, and that has catapulted him to the attention of mainstream media. Here in Brazil, we have what's called the Academia Brasileira de Letras. It's a Brazilian Academy of Letters. It's kind of a pantheon where you inducted when you have a body of work that is compelling. And one of the and traditionally has been mostly, even though that the founder was this guy Machado de Assis that I mentioned, but throughout the 20th century has been just the literary elite of the social elite that got inducted. But one of those who recently got inducted is Gilberto Gil, the singer. That he's still alive. He's with 80 years old, but he's an intellectual of the highest caliber. He's a poet, and so we do have a lot of black writers, and also we have a form of literature that's called cordel. That is many. There are short issue books with short letters with a short format. They are printed through the system of serigraphy, and those are sold on popular fairs, market, better say, popular markets. And generally, it comes in the literature is kind of it's particular form of literature called cordel literature that comes in form of rhymes, and this is widespread in the interior, and most of the writers are black, you know. But yes, the present day literary sensation in Brazil, it's a black guy. It's
That's
Luis. I can't find. I'm gonna try to find his name.
okay. If you can give us the name later, that'll be great. It reminds me of several things as I'm listening to everyone talk. Is that one, there has been a democratization of publishing because of social media. So we have platforms like Medium, which is kind of an online platform. Maya, you're a Medium writer. I have a column in Medium, and it has exposure. And I think part of its popularity is that our former president, Barack Obama, had decided that he would not publish in mainstream, but he publishes his articles on Medium. And I believe Michelle Obama also has a column there. And so that has helped some. But the real question about whether you can make a living is, I know, as Maya pointed out, a question that Zora Neale Hurston struggled with. She was both an anthropologist, a writer, and trying to be a Black woman writer in the early 20th century, in the 1920s and 30s, as prolific as she was, she never really made a living off of her writing. She was always struggling to find someone to support her and finance her, because as both of all of you have pointed out, publishers don't always see the value of Black writing. And I guess the question is, how can we as a society, what can we do to uplift Black writers and support them? I'm going to ask you, Zaylore, if you can speak to that. How were you able to become so successful, in getting your book out about the LGBTQ plus experience?
Well, a lot of it was, using the networks that I have, especially leveraging things like LinkedIn, because that's where my corporate persona is, and then leveraging social media, especially in regards to crowdfunding campaigns. So I had a crowdfunding campaign that was a year out before the book came out. So to start generating some interest in regards to it, so people can have a vested interest in it and have their names written in the back of the book to show that they supported this effort and this endeavor, because it's really a community effort, especially since I hired an army of queer youth to help me do the research for it. And I'm doing the same for my next book that I'm writing now, Our Black History in 50 States. So I think it's helpful to be able to leverage social media at any way, shape, and form that you can. I've also worked well in regards to securing corporate sponsorships. So getting corporations to purchase a certain number of books that get donated to LGBT organizations. And so I'll be doing the same with the Black History book that I'm writing. So just trying to find creative ways to be able to find and allow folks to support you. I see that there's a lot of authors and a lot of Black and brown authors, a lot of diverse authors that have their books on crowdfunding campaigns as well. So that's also an easy way to be able to help diverse voices get out there. I know that there's a lot of folks getting into the comic book sphere and with
Graphic,
graphic novels and Afrofuturism and all of that stuff. And so that's been, I love how you had referenced the democratization of it. And that's been a great way for individuals to be able to find ways and support, projects that they love. And so I think that's been helpful in regards to me getting the word out as it relates to my book, and then getting that broader appeal from a mainstream perspective as well.
And, I would say I'm going to be publishing some of my columns in a book on what's called Author Publish. And it is a platform that was created between a online publishing organization and Macmillan. Is it Macmillan? I think I think it's Macmillan, where they created a separate entity. They'll help you get your book published. And then if the larger publisher sees value in it, then you may actually get a conversation going. And I think it's very interesting, because what they were saying is the reason, because of course I said, so why did you create this? Is because we are starstruck. And if someone already has star power, that's who everybody wants. They want the one. And then everybody else just kind of lays out there sort of suffering. And what they realized is that there were so many talented writers, particularly BIPOC writers, who would not necessarily have access to an agent. And many of the large publishing companies, they won't even look at your manuscript unless you have an agent. And I know, Zaylore, you have an agent now. And so, Maya, what do you think? What are the ways that you think we can support, particularly and uplift Black writers, LGBTQ writers, people who don't fit the traditional kind of profile?
I would say, to echo what Zaylore mentioned, it's really important for a writer to have a supportive community behind him or her. That I do credit my success to, of course, knowing other writers in Triangle Association of Freelancers, but just knowing writers in general. Having that support from other writers can help you learn about the business of writing. If you're going into book publishing, other writers can tell you and give you recommendations for good publishers to work with. If you're a freelance writer, knowing writers can help you with finding good clients who are willing to pay you and pay you fairly. Um, Other than that, what I would also say is that I think it's important to support writers of all ages. Definitely support um, adult writers who are either aspiring writers or have already started their writing journey by reading their work, sharing their work is a big part of that. I think a lot of people do that. They have writers they love and don't tell anybody about a great book that they just read or a great blog post that they've come across. So it's definitely important to share work that you appreciate. And I also believe that it's important to support younger writers that you come across who are putting their work out there, and just younger writers that you come across in life. Because I definitely have to give my parents credit. Needless to say, given my name, my first name, needless to say, they were okay with me showing an interest in writing, but that doesn't always happen for our younger writers, especially younger writers of color, especially writers from the LGBTQ plus community. Support can be hard to come by. So those are the two things I would say for writers. Definitely seek out ways to build your own community if you don't already have a community of people supporting you. And for people who aren't writers, just support the writers that you know of and that you know in real life.
I want to go back to something that Zaylor said, which is that, sitting down to write a book takes research, it takes time. If you have a day job, how do you balance that out? And you mentioned crowdfunding. Zaylor, I want to ask you, how do you envision technology shaping the future of the writing industry and creating support, especially for Black writers? Because this is the one. COVID certainly put a damper on the kind of possibilities of writing that used to be out there. We're seeing less and less opportunities for consulting. Certainly, I've experienced that. And so, how do you see crowdfunding and even technology sort of shaping the future of writing?
I love the question, especially since the opportunity of crowdfunding provides the ability for communities to be able to support projects and efforts and writing and writers that they value. And so pairing that with the ability to be able to publish through print on demand, it can completely upturn the traditional writing metric where you normally would have to, as you indicated, get an agent and try to get a publisher and do all this kind of stuff. Where I have a dear friend that wrote a book and he's self-published and it's out there on Amazon, and he's got his social media platform out there in regards to wellness and mindfulness. And so there are folks that want to still go the traditional route, and those are options that are still available, and there's still the challenges that we had mentioned, but there's still the ability for us to be able to support our own, and support those people and those projects that it is that we love, the ones that we normally don't hear about. And given that I wrote a book for young people, it's also listening to the young kids and seeing what it is that they want. And it's been years that they've been saying that they want books on Black history, on Native American history, on women's history, on LGBTQI plus history. And so it's providing them for what they want as well. And so it's listening and keeping an ear to the ground in regards to what people are looking for and interested in. And if that's you out there watching, and you have that vision or that story that that others should hear or need to hear or have indicated that they want to hear, there are opportunities and resources for you to be able to make that happen.
And I think, the point that you make, first of all, there's very little new under the sun. I mean, it's not like people haven't written about Black history, women's history, LGBTQ
Right.
history. We didn't
Hmm.
just invent it yesterday. But I
Exactly.
think how you did yours with some of you have almost like caricatures of people, and, you did it in a fun way and presented it in language that was more accessible than, say, academic writing, which I think is important. Yeah, I've been both an academic writer, a public writer, a poet, sort of journalistic kind of writing. But I want to ask Yoji if he could say, how is technology impacting the writing in Brazil, particularly Black Brazilian writers? Do you have something like GoFundMe, where people can actually go online and say, I'll give $5 or $10 or whatever to this particular writer so they can get their book out? Is there anything like that available?
Um, I am not aware here. Um, those kind of solidarities has not take over as popular, you know. But the difficulty is greater. But at the same time, as you say, how information got democratized in the last 40, 50 years, there is more accessibility to people doing their own, where they are, empowered of writing on their PC and self-publish as a PDF. So the communities are very savvy with technology and computers. For example, I'm sorry, this happens much more in the music industry, where people don't need anymore to go through a recording company and things like that. If they have some basic skills of how to operate the social media and things like that, and they do record home in their own computers. A lot of more people are having access, to make the work known. You know, um, the not all the sectors of our society has um, as a has come to a point where they are conscious of the necessity of more corporative action. So recently is there in Brazil that we are gaining voice, black people to be heard. So, but certainly what happening is happening here too. It is the profusion of literary festivals, like as they do. Let's put a comparison example, Lula Palooza, or so they promote literary festivals in small cities of the states in the interior, where they do call authors of different countries and also so they do sections that are dedicated to Afro-Brazilian authors. By the way, I found the name of the guy. His name is Itamar Vieira Jr. He is breaking, the record sales. And his books, as I said earlier, the theme is around the relationship between the human being, the man, but the humans and the land. In this area here of called the Recôncavo Baiano, which is kind of the Bay Area around Bahia. That's an area predominantly black, historically black, and from where many of the cultural traits of the larger Brazilian culture starts. You know, as I mentioned, there is Gilberto Gil that got indicted to the Brazilian Letters Academy, and also there is another. I forgot to mention. There's a actor called Lázaro Ramos that he's also has revealed himself to be a multi faceted artist, and he's done directed a few films, and he has published uh, several books. Because of his mainstream fame, he is also heralding for other writers of Afro origin.
I think that, let me just take a moment and remind subscribers or viewers to go to our YouTube channel at Insight News MN on YouTube and to like us and subscribe to us so that you can continue to see this. And I want to repeat the announcement from the Minnesota Department of Health, which is hosting a COVID vaccine event at Amherst H. Wilder, 451 Lexington Parkway North in St. Paul, Minnesota, 55104. And that event is going to be on Saturday, July 15th, 2023, from 10 to 4 p.m. And the reason I bring that up is that COVID had a profound impact on gatherings, on writers' conferences, any kind of conferences. Things moved to a lot of Zoom based. And I hear all of you saying, it sounds like, Zaylore, that we're sort of back in a moment where people are starting to get together again. And of course, writers' conferences, one of the guests that I'd hope to have on the show is someone who hosts conferences for Black writers. So that's one place that we can support Black writers, is to find out where the conferences are, when they have book signings and bookstores, to do that. Zaylord, as you indicated, on Amazon, to leave comments and stuff so that people will know that you really like a book. But I also want to sort of pick your brain about what you're thinking at this moment in time, when we actually have moved into a sort of cultural moment where people are burning books, and in particular books by people who are not majority or not viewed as part of the majority white culture, where people are banning books like What You Can and Can't Teach in School. There's legislation against what's called critical race theory, which was never taught in K through 12, but is seen as kind of a symbolic way of talking about anything that critiques the history of slavery in the United States, that critiques the discriminatory practices against not only BIPOC, but LGBTQ plus people. What is your sense about what the implications of some of these legislations, the anti-woke legislation in Florida, the state of Iowa had included, had a bill even before DeSantis did his anti-woke bill. Iowa had already passed a bill against CRT, critical race theory. And I don't know if any of you have seen it, but the oldest survivor of the Tulsa massacre that occurred, in which over 1,000 Black people were killed, and what was the largest Black Wall Street in the country at the time, was basically devastated. It was basically burnt to the ground. The woman, who is over, I think she's 104 years old, she had filed a suit for reparations. And the ruling just came back where the judge not only denied her, but denied her with prejudice, saying that she could never appeal this again. And so she has released a book that basically is saying, don't let them bury my story, let my voice be heard. What are you all thinking as you are about to launch a second book, Zaylord, that will actually take up now Black history as a kind of companion to the one that you wrote on Our Gay 50 States, Our Black 50 States? What are the kinds of things that you're going to talk about, but what are the implications of some of this legislation for your future publishing and book writing? Zaylord.
Well, my first book is officially on the banned book list, so I see that as
Ah,
a I see that as a badge of honor, because that means, I'm getting stories in history out there that they that they find challenging and don't want people to know and read. And so my work is going to be the same as it relates to our Black history in 50 states. And it's not just highlighting, the usual suspects that you would always hear about, but it's going to be,
mm,
all the other stories like 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 the one that you just introduced all of us to, in this session, right? And it's about, uplifting all of our stories and making sure that the richness of our diversity, even within and amongst the Black community, is something that is uplifted. So, yeah, I mean, now I can put on my legal hat in regard to this. I mean,
mm,
most of those book bannings, um, when they go through the court systems, that they're each one at a time that they're being struck down as being unconstitutional. For First Amendment rights, all different kinds of rights, from that perspective, not being able to reference the fact that you're LGBT, or, the whole CRT part is just a dog whistle in regards to anything that's Black and diverse. And so, I don't see the legislation being upheld. The problem is that it takes so long to go through the court system that the impact is already being felt by the young people.
mhm,
And so by the time, some of these matters get all the way through either state court systems or the federal court system, all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, that could take 10, 15 years. And
mm,
so by then, the damage is already done. The young people weren't able to see themselves reflected in their history. They weren't able to learn about the true story of Rosa Parks, where Florida is trying to frame it as if she just was a person that didn't want to give up her seat, and have no reference to the fact that she was a Black woman and she wasn't supposed to be sitting in that particular part of the bus, and that there were laws on the book saying that she couldn't do that and be there. So that's why it's important for, Black writers still to be able to be out there and sharing these stories and sharing our history, the true history, right? The unadulterated, like the good, the bad, and the ugly. No country is perfect, but, part of moving ideally to a more perfect union is to make sure that we're able to atone for our sins. And I think that's one of the main things, one of the main challenges, that America has, is and relates to that, is that there's a lot of sins that we haven't atoned for. And case in point is this most recent Tulsa verdict
And
of our very
so,
judge.
Maya, thank you. Maya, I'm going to ask you because I wonder, is this discussion about anti woke or book banning, book burning, are these discussions that are happening in sort of organizations like the Triangle Association of Freelancers? Are people talking about this, or is it sort of like if it impacts you, then you're concerned about it, but nobody else is really concerned about it?
There is an overall concern among writers, not only in uh, my organization that I'm a member of, but I've I've just heard a lot of talk in real life and on social media. Writers are very concerned, and rightfully so. And I do agree with Zaylor that it just shows why it's more important than ever for writers to share their work, and for people who support those writers to share their work as well. But I also think that this is a lesson for writers and readers, because I think we tend to use writing and use reading as an escape from reality. And a common phrase you'll hear is, "Oh, I don't really like to get into politics." And um, as a person of color, as a woman, and especially since I grew up as a military brat, I have never had that luxury. And when I hear people say that, I almost can't relate to that, because that's just never been my experience. But I think more writers are starting to realize um, that it isn't important, and are starting to see how politics affects our access to historical information, definitely, but even our access to the voices that we hear from whenever we're enjoying a work of fiction as well. And so I think that's why it's important to support and vote for politicians who align with your beliefs, who are going to support democracy and support your right and everybody's right to learn information and to hear from stories from diverse voices.
Yeah, I will plug to bookshop.org because one of the ways that we can support Black authors and any author who is not in the mainstream is by buying their books, and not just electronic versions, but actual books. but bookshop.org is an organization that actually gives money to local bookstores. If you go to their website, they've given $26,836,483 to bookstores across the country. And the reason I came across it is someone gave me a gift certificate. So I started going there, and I just Googled them to say Black-owned bookstores, and they actually have a list of Black-owned bookstores in 2022. So Zaylore, you may want to take a look at that list because they would be a great outlet. And I'm seeing things like, not only California, but like in Georgia, in Illinois, in Indiana, Iowa, Massachusetts, Minnesota, these places, Oklahoma. So I think that's one thing that we need to do is encourage people to not just buy electronic versions, but buy actual books, because that helps people to understand and know what's possible. Yoji, are there any Black bookstores that I will get to go to when I visit Brazil in August?
Oh, yes. You're gonna be in a city that's majority of the population is Black people,
Yes.
so there's gonna be plenty of Black bookstores. The here the what a phenomenon that is happening is kind of the market is consolidating. So the big bookstores like kind of national chain, they are kind of
Mhm.
closing in
Ah,
downtown, in the shopping malls. There's shopping malls everywhere. So, but you find grassroots. You're gonna. I hope when you come around, there is a friend of mine that she is a Black person that she sells books in the street in the
okay.
historic district. And I found that so unique, and because here people have to be very creative as entrepreneurs
Yes.
to supplement their income. So people sell everything and do all kind of private enterprises. And this lady, it is in this touristic area. She, just built a wood stall, and there's full of books and very interesting books that you don't find anywhere. So I have bought a few books from her. Yeah. You're gonna come to a place that Bahia. It's very friendly to culture and to books and to writers. You know.
And I discovered the same thing in Jamaica when I was there. Tuesday, I think it's Tuesday or Thursday night. There's an open market, so people come and sell their wares. And there was one table filled with books, not the books that books that have to do with Black history that they've apparently collected from all over, not only in Jamaica but wherever they go. And there's just this huge display of these books that people were just eating up. And you had the stall that had someone doing herbal elixirs. You had the stall where people were selling all kinds of food, of course. And so it was an exciting thing to see. And it takes me back to the moment, given my age, of the 1960s when we had the rise of broadside presses. These were the presses that came out of the Black Power movement, the Black aesthetic, mostly out of Detroit. My first book was Pearl's Song, which was a book of poetry, was actually published by Lotus Press, which was founded by another poet, Naomi Magic Long. And then she sold the imprint to Michigan State, and they never really did what she had hoped they would do, which was to expand its sphere of influence. And so she took it back. And basically, all of us who published with her, we own the copyright. So I plan to be reprinting, my book of poetry, because it's been out of print for a while. And a lot of it is just doing self-publishing, because what you have to go through to work with, mainstream publishers. When I am coaching people around getting a book contract, I tell them your editor may be friendly, but they are not your friends. Their job is to get the publisher the best deal they can. So of course they're going to be friendly to you, but don't mistake that for them being your friend, because your job is to get yourself the best contracts. So I now own all the secondary rights to my books that have been published by, academic presses, which is highly unusual. And I think it's taking that control. That's one of the reasons I founded the archive, is that once we've written all this stuff, what are we going to do with it? So for me, having the Irma McClaurin Black Feminist Archive becomes a space where people can put their materials and know that it's going to be preserved. It's in the same library as W.E.B. Du Bois's papers, so I feel like I'm in very good company. They have 99,000 items of Du Bois. He was very prolific, and all of those are in the University of Massachusetts Library, which is named the W.E.B. Du Bois Library, and is one of the tallest, 25 stories, one of the tallest, I think the tallest academic library in the country. So I go around and I'll be talking to some of the Black Brazilian feminists to say, what are you going to do with your stuff? Where are you going to archive it? And I think as writers, we need to understand that the drafts of our things, not just the finished product. Zaylore, I hope you're collecting all those things and holding on to them, because people need to see the process. Writing is, after all, a process. And it's sort of the stages that we take to get to that finished product that are almost as significant as the finished product itself. I think that's something that sometimes gets missed. But I want to ask if any of you have any final words that you'd like to leave people with in terms of, what it means to be a writer in this country, as a Black writer, as a Black woman writer, as a gay Black writer, as a Brazilian. And Yoji, you didn't say that you write, but I'm assuming that you also write as well.
Well, listen, I am very shy, and but actually, it was today or yesterday. Recurrently, people has been telling me that I need to write a book about things that has happened in my life, and but if you see me, I'm very reticent about talking about me, or this. I like more to be an observer of things. So maybe when I'm a bit older, perhaps, I'm gonna dictate to somebody.
And so
Ah.
what about you, Maya? Do you have any books that are going to be forthcoming? I know that you have a column on Medium. Can you tell us what your writing future is?
Well, for me, I do plan on continuing to write on Medium. I also have my own blog, which is basically my name, mayaspikes.com. Definitely plan on doing that. Also looking for, of course, any opportunities and more opportunities to share my writing journey on YouTube. So I'm looking into doing that very soon as well. And as far as leaving with any last thoughts and takeaways for writers, my advice would be to stay encouraged. I know that things do look bleak right now, but just to be encouraged and to write anyway, and to simply use the knowledge that you have. Of course, always be on the lookout for new information and new ways that you can not only improve your own writing, but connect with other writers, but to just go ahead and share your writing the best way you know how, because that is the good thing, is that thanks to channels like the different social media platforms. Even with all the legislation, discouraging legislation that's out there, there are channels that are helping to kind of balance that out and are ensuring that there are still ways for us to share either information that we've learned and want to share with other people, or just share our stories with other people as well.
Zaylore, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what your vision is for our Black 50 states. How is it going to differ in terms of format or direction? Are you going to use the crowdsourcing? Yasmin had asked me to ask a question about artificial intelligence. Are you using artificial intelligence, at all to gather some of the material? Just tell us any final words and what you're thinking.
Well, I'm a bit wary of AI at the moment, and the news just came out today that there's, federal, I think, investigation into ChatGPT. So we'll see in regards to data collection and all that. But our Black History in 50 States will be actually the same format as our Gay History in 50 States. And the interesting part is, it's a different. As you go back in history, there are fewer and fewer folks that were out as members of the LGBTQI plus community. So it was a different type of research digging to find entries. Whereas for our Black History in 50 States, Black folks are Black folks, and we've always been here. So now there's a plethora of potential entries, and so it's really a different kind of dynamic in regard to really combing through and finding those nuggets that I want to make sure that are in there. But I'm excited in regards to being able to be involved in defining what's the definition of Blackness and what is diversity as defined within the Black community, and trying to make sure that that's something that's properly represented as well, so that our young people can have access to this in their schools and not just see the same old boring history or their watered down history books that are currently being there, but actually see history where folks like them are in there, and they can. My whole thing is always saying that if you see yourself reflected in history, then you can know that you can become a history maker yourself.
Of course, of course. And one of the things I'm thinking about is how is the current climate? You may not get it in the schools. So how are you thinking differently about distribution and access to youth outside of schools? Because that may not be possible.
Well, I'm a kid from the Boys and Girls Club. I was there and grew up there and stuff. And so there's always ways and spaces where young folks can, congregate. And so it's finding creative spaces where they will have access to the information in those books in there as well. Libraries are always going to be around. I know the American Library Association is still on the front lines in regards to finding some of these bands as well. And so that's important spaces.
And of course, archives. Don't forget the archives. And
Absolutely.
I need to talk to you about what you're going to do with your stuff.
You're always on the hunt.
I am. And Yoji, let me ask you, I'm looking forward to coming to Brazil, and I want to thank you online he's translated one of my articles, Making Black Women Visible and Heard, into Portuguese. So I'll be able to share that with people there. So just final words.
Well, the final words that I skipped to say, my dad is a writer, and he wrote like almost 40 books and published 4. And he did go to that stuff. Some of the books got published with the help of government, and some of them were self-published. So,
well, we will have to talk about that when I get there.
Yeah.
We're almost out of time here, and it's been wonderful. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Zaylore. Thank you, Yoji. And I want to thank our viewers for following us. Please remember to go to our page on YouTube. We're also on the Black Press USA YouTube, and make sure that you subscribe, and we'll see you this time next week on Thursday, or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday for the conversation with Al McFarlane. Thank you so much for being with us.